What kind of grandmother decides a child isn't worth a steak? That was the question echoing in my head the moment my mother cheerfully announced the family's annual summer barbecue. Every July, without fail, the entire Carter family gathered at my parents' lake house in northern Michigan, where my mother insisted on ordering premium dry-aged ribeye steaks for every grandchild. She loved telling everyone they were exactly $120 each, as though the price itself proved how deeply she loved her family. My daughter, Lily, was 8 years old that summer, bright-eyed, polite, and the kind of child who always thanked people before they even remembered to hand her something. She had spent weeks talking about the barbecue, asking if Grandpa would let her fish from the dock again and whether Grandma would make her famous peach cobbler. I smiled every time because I wanted to believe this year would finally be different. My name is Emma now, though I was born an Anderson before I married Daniel, and somewhere along the way my last name changed while my place inside my own family quietly disappeared. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. I had dropped by my parents' house to return a casserole dish when I heard my mother laughing in the kitchen while speaking to the local butcher. She carefully counted every grandchild's order out loud. 1 for Mason, 1 for Chloe, 1 for Ethan, 1 for Noah. She paused just long enough for my stomach to tighten. And that's all. The butcher politely asked if she wanted another steak because he remembered Lily from last year. My mother answered with a laugh so casual it almost sounded harmless. No, not for her. She can eat the burgers. She never knew I was standing in the hallway, frozen with the empty casserole dish still in my hands. For a long moment, I convinced myself there had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe Lily had requested a hamburger. Maybe the steaks were running short. Maybe there was some explanation that wouldn't leave an 8-year-old wondering why every cousin received something special while she did not. But deep inside, I already knew the truth because this wasn't the first time. Lily's birthday gifts were always smaller. Her Christmas stocking always looked lighter. Family photos somehow managed to leave her standing at the edge. None of it was dramatic enough for outsiders to notice, yet together they formed a pattern impossible for a mother to ignore. That evening, Lily ran into the kitchen carrying a notebook filled with little drawings of the barbecue she imagined was coming. She had sketched the picnic tables, the fireworks over the lake, Grandpa holding a fishing pole, and herself sitting beside her cousins with the biggest smile on the page. "Mom," she asked, "do you think Grandma will remember I like my steak medium?" I opened my mouth, but no words came. Sometimes the hardest lies are the ones we tell to protect someone we love, and at that moment I wasn't sure which would hurt more, the truth, or letting her believe she belonged somewhere she had already been quietly erased. The days leading up to the barbecue moved with the strange rhythm that only family gatherings seem to have, where excitement and anxiety somehow occupy the same space. Lily counted down each morning by placing a bright yellow sticker on the kitchen calendar, smiling every time she realized another day had passed. She practiced casting a small fishing rod across our backyard, convinced Grandpa would finally teach her how to reel in a bass from the lake. Every innocent question she asked felt like another weight settling onto my shoulders. Daniel noticed it before I ever admitted it. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, he found me sitting alone on the back porch staring into the darkness with my phone still resting in my hand. I had opened my mother's latest family group message at least 20 times without replying. She had written about matching table decorations, homemade lemonade, and how every grandchild would receive a personalized place card at dinner. There was no mention of Lily, yet somehow there never needed to be. The omission had become its own language. Daniel sat beside me without speaking for nearly a minute before quietly asking, "Are you planning to pretend nothing happened?" I wanted to say yes because pretending had always been easier. I had spent years convincing myself that every slight was accidental, every forgotten invitation was an oversight, every unequal gift simply poor planning. But hearing my mother tell the butcher not to order a steak for my daughter had shattered every excuse I had ever invented for her. If I confront her, I whispered, she will tell everyone I am overreacting. Daniel nodded because he had seen it happen before. My mother had an extraordinary talent for making anyone who challenged her appear emotional while she remained perfectly calm. "Then do not argue," he said. "Just watch." His answer stayed with me. Sometimes people reveal themselves more clearly when nobody interrupts them. The next afternoon my younger brother, Ryan, called to confirm what time we were arriving at the lake house. He chatted about fishing conditions, fireworks, and the unusually warm weather before casually mentioning that Mom had reserved exactly 7 premium steaks. I counted silently. There were 8 grandchildren. Ryan never noticed the pause on my end. He assumed I was distracted and kept talking about bringing extra lawn chairs. After we hung up, I stared at the family photo hanging above our fireplace. Every smiling face looked connected except Lily's. Even in that picture she stood near the edge, almost cropped away. I remembered taking that photograph 2 summers earlier. My mother had insisted all the cousins stand together first before someone finally called Lily over after the picture was nearly finished. At the time I convinced myself it meant nothing. Looking back, I wondered how many moments I had quietly rewritten inside my own memory simply to preserve the illusion that my family loved my daughter the same way they loved everyone else. Saturday morning finally arrived beneath a bright blue sky, and Lily hurried downstairs wearing the little white sundress she had picked out weeks before. She held a small container of wildflowers she had gathered from our yard because she wanted to surprise Grandma with something beautiful. Watching her climb into the back seat with that hopeful smile, completely unaware that she had already been excluded. Before the first grill had even been lit, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever happened at that barbecue, my daughter would never again have to wonder whether she was enough. The familiar gravel driveway curved through rows of towering pine trees before opening onto my parents' lake house, and from a distance everything looked exactly the way it always had. Children laughed near the dock. Folding chairs circled the fire pit. Red, white, and blue decorations fluttered gently in the warm breeze. Anyone driving past would have seen the picture of a perfect American family celebrating another 4th of July weekend. Lily pressed her face against the car window and smiled the moment she spotted her cousins racing across the lawn. "Can I go play?" she asked before Daniel had even turned off the engine. I forced a smile and nodded, watching her sprint toward them with the wildflowers still carefully cradled in her hands. She reached my mother first. "These are for you, Grandma." My mother accepted the flowers with a pleasant smile, thanked her, and immediately handed them to my aunt without looking down a second time. It was such a small moment that nobody else noticed. I did. Daniel did. Lily did not. She had already run toward the swing set, believing she had made her grandmother happy. My father greeted us with a quick hug and asked Daniel about work before wandering off to check the grill. My brother Ryan was already laughing with our cousins near the patio, while my sister Melissa carefully arranged colorful place cards along the long outdoor dining table. I counted them from where I stood. 8 chairs for adults. 8 smaller chairs for the grandchildren. 7 elegant black plates rested beside thick linen napkins. The 8th smaller place setting held a plain white paper plate. My pulse slowed instead of racing. Somehow seeing it prepared so deliberately felt worse than hearing my mother's phone call. This had not been an accident. It had been planned. My mother walked toward the table carrying a tray of chilled lemonade. "Everything looks wonderful," one of the neighbors complimented her. She smiled proudly. "Family deserves the best." Those words lingered in the air like sunlight reflecting across the lake. Family deserves the best. I quietly looked at the lonely paper plate again. Daniel stepped beside me without saying a word. He had noticed it too. Across the yard Lily and her cousins were laughing as they chased each other through the grass. There was no jealousy in her face, no suspicion, only complete trust that she belonged exactly where she was. That innocence made every carefully arranged detail around the table feel unbearably heavy. As lunchtime approached, the rich smell of sizzling beef drifted across the backyard. My father proudly flipped thick ribeye steaks over glowing charcoal while relatives admired the perfect grill marks. Conversations blended with laughter, the clink of glasses, and the distant hum of boats crossing the lake. Then my mother picked up a silver serving tray and began calling each grandchild by name. Mason. A perfectly cooked steak landed on a black plate. Chloe. Another followed. Ethan. Noah. Ava. Sophie. Jack. 7 beautiful steaks disappeared one by one until only an empty tray remained. Lily waited patiently at the end of the line with the same hopeful smile she had worn all morning, completely certain her turn was next. Instead, my mother reached behind the cooler, pulled out a package of frozen hamburger patties, and said with an easy laugh that carried across the entire patio, "Sweetheart, these expensive steaks are for the other grandchildren. I made you a burger instead. Children your age cannot tell the difference anyway." Every conversation stopped at once. For one endless second nobody moved. Even the children sensed something had changed. Lily looked from the hamburger package to the empty serving tray and then toward the black plates resting in front of her cousins. There was no anger in her eyes, only quiet confusion. "Grandma," she asked softly, "did they run out?" My mother's smile never faded. "No, sweetheart. The steaks were planned ahead. Yours is different." She spoke with the same pleasant voice someone might use while discussing the weather, completely unaware of how every word settled over the patio. My aunt suddenly became fascinated with rearranging napkins. Ryan stared into his iced tea. My father continued standing beside the grill with the spatula still in his hand, saying nothing. Silence can be louder than shouting when everyone knows the truth, but nobody wants to be the first to acknowledge it. Lily nodded politely because that was the kind of little girl she was. "Okay," she whispered with a tiny smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She picked up the plain paper plate without complaining. That single movement broke something inside me. She was trying to make everyone else comfortable while being treated as though she mattered less than the other children sitting around the same table. Daniel reached for my hand beneath the table. His grip was calm and steady, reminding me of the promise I had made before we left home. I slowly stood up. Every conversation disappeared as chairs creaked and distant laughter from the dock faded into the background. My mother looked at me with mild surprise. "Is something wrong, Emma?" she asked as though she truly could not imagine the answer. I looked at Lily first. She was carefully setting her paper plate beside the elegant black dinnerware surrounding her, trying to fit into a place that had never been prepared for her. Then I turned back toward my mother. "I have a question," I said quietly. "When did my daughter stop becoming your granddaughter?" The words drifted across the patio with surprising calm. Nobody interrupted. My mother's smile finally weakened. "Do not be dramatic," she replied. "It is only food." I nodded once. "No. The food is not the point. Planning 7 special meals for 8 children is the point." She crossed her arms. "Lily is younger. She likes hamburgers." I looked at Lily. "Sweetheart, what did you ask me 3 days ago?" Lily hesitated before answering honestly. "I asked if Grandma remembered I liked my steak medium." The breeze off the lake carried her quiet voice across the table. My mother opened her mouth but no explanation came. There are moments when excuses collapse under the weight of simple truth, and this was one of them. My father slowly lowered the spatula onto the grill and removed his apron without saying a word. Ryan stared at his mother with an expression I had never seen before, as though he were looking at a stranger. My aunt finally lifted her eyes from the tablecloth. Nobody defended what had happened because there was nothing left to defend. The carefully arranged celebration had cracked open, revealing something much older than a missing steak. It revealed years of quiet choices that everyone had witnessed, everyone had justified, and everyone except one little girl had pretended not to see. My mother looked around the table as though she expected someone to rescue her from the silence she had created. Nobody did. The gentle sounds of the lake drifted across the backyard, but at our table every face seemed frozen in place. Finally she laughed softly, the way people sometimes do when they believe confidence alone can erase an uncomfortable moment. "Emma, you are making this into something much bigger than it is," she said. "It is one meal. Children forget these things by tomorrow." Before I could answer, Lily quietly placed the paper plate back onto the table. She did not cry. She did not complain. She simply looked at her grandmother with the kind of honest curiosity that only children possess. "Grandma," she asked, "did I do something wrong?" Those 6 words carried more weight than any speech I could have given. My mother's expression shifted for just an instant before returning to its familiar composure. "Of course not, sweetheart," she replied. "You just do not need an expensive steak." Lily accepted the answer with a small nod because she trusted adults to tell the truth. I realized then that the greatest danger was not that she would remember this afternoon forever. The greatest danger was that she would begin believing she deserved to be treated differently. Daniel slowly stood beside me. His voice remained calm. "Then let us solve the problem." He reached for Lily's hand. "If she is not important enough to receive the same welcome as the other grandchildren, then our family will eat somewhere else." Nobody argued with him. My father finally cleared his throat. "Linda," he said quietly to my mother, "I thought every grandchild was supposed to be treated the same." She looked genuinely offended. "Do not start taking sides. I paid for this entire gathering." Ryan rubbed the back of his neck before speaking for the first time. "Mom, Emma is not upset because of the steak. She is upset because you planned this ahead of time." Melissa looked down at her own daughter sitting beside Lily and slowly slid her child's black plate toward the center of the table. "If Lily is eating a hamburger," she said softly, "then Chloe will too." Ryan looked at his son and did exactly the same thing. One by one, another parent quietly moved a steak away. No speeches. No dramatic gestures. Just simple decisions. Within less than a minute every expensive steak sat untouched in the middle of the table while every grandchild asked for hamburgers instead. My mother stared at the untouched plates in disbelief. She had spent hundreds of dollars trying to make 7 children feel special, yet those same children had chosen to remain together instead of accepting a privilege that excluded their cousin. Lily looked around in confusion. "You all want burgers too?" she asked. Mason smiled at her. "They taste better if everybody has the same thing." The children laughed and ran back toward the yard while my father quietly carried the untouched steaks inside the house. The celebration slowly resumed, but something fundamental had changed. For the first time in years, nobody pretended not to notice the difference between fairness and favoritism, and once that difference had been spoken aloud, it became impossible for anyone at the table to look away. The rest of the afternoon unfolded with an unfamiliar quietness that no amount of sunshine could brighten. The children eventually forgot about the meal and disappeared toward the dock, laughing as they skipped stones across the water and searched for frogs along the shoreline. Lily ran beside her cousins with the same joyful energy she had arrived with, but every time she glanced back toward the adults I wondered if she was still searching for an answer that nobody had been brave enough to give her. My mother remained on the patio, collecting untouched plates with movements that had become noticeably slower. The expensive steaks she had proudly ordered sat cooling beneath sheets of aluminum foil, untouched symbols of a decision that had failed in the most unexpected way. Nobody praised the meal. Nobody complimented the planning. Conversations drifted toward the weather, fishing, and fireworks because easier subjects demanded less courage. My father eventually found me standing near the old wooden dock where the lake reflected the late afternoon sun like polished glass. He stood beside me for several moments before speaking. "I should have stopped this a long time ago," he admitted quietly. His voice carried a weariness I had never heard before. I kept telling myself it was easier to stay out of it. I looked across the water instead of answering immediately. Staying out of it was still choosing a side, I finally said. He lowered his eyes because he knew I was right. Behind us, Lily laughed as Mason helped her untangle a fishing line. The children had already moved on from lunch because children often forgive faster than adults deserve. That simple kindness made the afternoon feel even heavier. A little later, Ryan walked over carrying 2 bottles of water. He handed one to me before rubbing the back of his neck, the same nervous habit he had carried since childhood. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I noticed little things over the years, but I convinced myself they were not important enough to mention." I smiled sadly. That is how favoritism survives. It survives because everyone calls it a little thing until all the little things become someone's childhood. Ryan stared toward Lily as she proudly held up a tiny bluegill she had caught with Grandpa's old fishing rod. My father knelt beside her, smiling in a way that seemed almost apologetic. Ryan slowly shook his head. "She deserves better than what happened today. She deserves people who choose her even when it is uncomfortable," I answered. As evening approached, relatives quietly packed folding chairs into truck beds and loaded coolers into the backs of their vehicles. Nobody lingered as long as they usually did. The annual family barbecue, once expected to stretch late into the night, slowly dissolved before sunset. My mother thanked people for coming, but the cheerful confidence that normally filled her voice had disappeared. She watched each family drive away with an expression that suggested she still believed everyone else had misunderstood her intentions. Before we climbed into our own car, Lily ran back toward the porch holding a tiny seashell she had found near the shore. She reached up and placed it gently into her grandmother's hand. "This is for you," she said with a warm smile. "It is my favorite one." My mother looked down at the small shell resting in her palm, unable to speak. Lily turned and skipped back toward our car without waiting for praise or thanks. As Daniel started the engine and we pulled away from the lake house, I glanced into the rearview mirror one final time. My mother still stood alone on the porch holding the smallest gift she had received all day, and for the first time I wondered whether she finally understood that kindness had been freely offered to her by the very child she had chosen not to value. 2 weeks passed more quietly than I expected. Nobody from my family called to argue about what had happened at the barbecue. Nobody demanded an apology. The silence itself became the answer. Life settled back into its ordinary rhythm. Daniel returned to work each morning, Lily finished another week of summer day camp, and our evenings were filled with bike rides through the neighborhood and homemade ice cream on the front porch. Yet every now and then I would catch Lily studying old family photographs with an expression that seemed older than 8 years. One evening she pointed at a picture taken several summers earlier. "Mom," she asked, "was Grandma always happier when everyone else came over?" I paused before answering because children rarely ask the question they truly mean. "Why do you ask?" She traced her finger across the photograph until it rested on her own tiny face standing near the edge of the group. "I am always on the side." My heart sank because she had noticed something I had spent years trying to ignore. I sat beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Pictures only show where someone is standing," I told her gently. "They never show how important someone is." She leaned against me without saying another word, but I knew that reassurance alone would never erase what she had experienced. Respect is not taught through speeches. It is learned through consistent actions. The following Saturday morning the doorbell rang just after breakfast. When I opened the front door I was surprised to find my father standing there alone, wearing his old baseball cap and holding a weathered tackle box in one hand. He looked tired, as though he had spent several nights thinking instead of sleeping. "Is Lily home?" he asked quietly. She hurried to the doorway the moment she heard his voice. His face softened into a genuine smile. "I heard there is a young fisherman who still owes me another trip to the lake." Lily's eyes brightened instantly. "Really?" He nodded. "Really. But this time I was hoping we could choose the place together. Daniel invited him inside, and for the first time in years the conversation felt natural instead of carefully managed. My father eventually looked toward me. I have spent too much of my life assuming peace meant saying nothing, he admitted. Now I realize silence can hurt people just as much as harsh words. I appreciated his honesty because it asked for nothing in return. He did not defend the past. He simply acknowledged it. Before leaving, he handed Lily a small wooden box. Inside rested an antique fishing lure that had belonged to his own father. The paint had faded with age, but the polished metal hook had been carefully removed years earlier, leaving it as nothing more than a keepsake. My grandfather gave this to me when I was about your age, he said. One day I hope you will pass it to someone you love. Lily held the little lure as though it were made of glass. Thank you, Grandpa. He smiled, but his eyes carried a quiet sadness. As he walked back toward his truck, I noticed him looking at our family through the front window before climbing inside. It was the look of a man who finally understood that repairing trust begins with small choices repeated over time, not with one perfect apology. By the end of the month, something unexpected had begun to happen. The family group chat, once filled almost entirely with my mother's plans and announcements, had become quieter. Instead, my father started sending photographs from his fishing trips with Lily. Ryan shared pictures of all the cousins playing together at a local park. Melissa organized a weekend picnic where every child received the same lunch packed in matching baskets. Nobody announced that things were changing. They simply started making different choices. One afternoon my phone rang while I was folding laundry. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for several seconds before answering. Her voice sounded different, stripped of the confidence that had always surrounded her. Can I come by? She asked. There was no explanation, no attempt to defend herself. Only a question. She arrived carrying a small cardboard box wrapped with a blue ribbon. Lily greeted her politely at the front door before returning to the living room where she was building a puzzle with Daniel. My mother watched quietly for a moment before turning toward me. I have been thinking about what happened, she began. I waited without interrupting. Your father has barely spoken to me these past weeks unless it was necessary. Ryan told me I disappointed him. Melissa said she could not stop thinking about Lily's question. She lowered her eyes. I kept telling myself everyone was overreacting until I realized nobody was talking about the steak anymore. They were talking about how I made a little girl feel. She placed the box on the kitchen table. Inside rested 8 identical gift cards, each tucked into matching envelopes with every grandchild's name written carefully across the front. I know this does not fix anything, she admitted. I just wanted every child to know they matter the same. I looked at the envelopes before quietly pushing the box back toward her. Confusion crossed her face. You do not want them, she asked. The gifts are not what Lily needs, I answered gently. She needs consistency. She needs to know that when she walks into a room she belongs there without anyone having to make up for yesterday. My mother remained silent for several moments. Then she nodded slowly, as though she finally understood something she had been resisting for years. She carried the unopened box into the living room and knelt beside Lily. Sweetheart, she said softly, would you like to help me with something next weekend? Lily looked up from her puzzle. What kind of something? I thought maybe you could help me choose desserts for the whole family picnic. I want every grandchild to pick one favorite recipe. Lily smiled. Can everybody have their favorite? Yes, my mother answered without hesitation. Everybody. Lily accepted the invitation with the uncomplicated grace that children often possess. She did not ask why things had changed. She simply believed they could. As my mother prepared to leave that afternoon, she paused on the front porch and looked back at our home. Thank you for telling the truth, she said quietly. It hurt more than I expected, but not nearly as much as realizing how long I had been refusing to hear it. I watched her walk to her car with slower steps than I remembered, carrying not just the unopened box but the weight of understanding that genuine change begins long before anyone notices it from the outside. Autumn arrived with crisp mornings, golden leaves, and the quiet feeling that our family had entered a different season in more ways than one. The first gathering after the summer barbecue was held at Ryan's house instead of my parents' lake home. Nobody voted on the change. It simply happened, and everyone accepted it. Long folding tables filled the backyard, children raced through piles of colorful leaves, and the smell of fresh apple cider drifted through the cool afternoon air. When we arrived, Lily hesitated beside the gate for only a second before running toward her cousins. This time nobody forgot to call her over. Nobody asked her to wait. Nobody treated her as though she belonged somewhere else. Ryan had arranged one long table for every child instead of separating them. Melissa smiled as she handed identical place cards to each grandchild. Every plate matched. Every cup matched. Every dessert matched. There was nothing extravagant about the meal, yet somehow it felt richer than any expensive dinner I could remember. My father walked over carrying a small framed photograph. "Would you help me hang this inside?" he asked. The picture showed every grandchild standing shoulder to shoulder on the dock from several years earlier. I noticed something different immediately. Lily stood in the center. "That is not how the original picture looked," I said quietly. My father smiled with gentle embarrassment. "No." I asked the photographer if he still had the original files. He did. We printed the one where everyone was standing together before people started moving around. I looked at the photograph for a long moment. It did not erase the past, but it reminded me that memories could be preserved with greater honesty than they had been lived. Later that afternoon my mother walked over while Lily and the other children carved pumpkins together on the patio. She watched them laugh before speaking. "I used to think love was measured by how much money I spent," she admitted softly. "Now I understand children remember something much simpler. They remember whether they felt welcome." I nodded because there was nothing left to argue about. Some lessons arrive too late to prevent hurt, but not too late to change what comes next. As the sun began to set, every grandchild gathered for a family photograph. Before anyone could organize the children, Lily reached over and took Chloe's hand while Mason grabbed her other hand. The entire group naturally closed together until there was no edge left for anyone to stand on. The photographer smiled. "Everybody ready?" 8 cheerful voices answered together. The camera clicked just as the last rays of sunlight stretched across the backyard. Months later that photograph found a permanent place on my living room wall. Visitors often admired the smiling children without knowing the story behind the picture. They never saw the painful afternoon that had forced our family to confront uncomfortable truths. They only saw 8 happy grandchildren standing together exactly as they should have from the beginning. Every time Lily walked past that frame she smiled without hesitation, never questioning where she belonged. Watching her confidence grow became the greatest gift our family ever received. Looking back now, I rarely think about an expensive meal or an awkward afternoon by the lake. I think about a little girl who offered a seashell to someone who had hurt her, a grandfather who chose courage over silence, parents who finally spoke the truth, cousins who refused special treatment unless everyone shared it, and a family that slowly learned respect is never proven by costly gifts. It is revealed through ordinary choices that quietly tell every child, every single time, you belong here.